Mark spent 3 days watching that house without seeing the woman in question. Every day he saw a man from an Asian background coming in and going out all alone. He even followed him to his workplace at the FBI building and to the nearby mosque. The man was a regular attendee of the mosque. Mark Johnson knew that mosque very well. It was the same mosque, long time ago, his beloved wife and he had gone in the past, fooled its imam, claiming to be new converts to Islam. He worried that if he followed the man, the imam of the mosque might recognize him. He remembered how the African-American Muslim man who was an ambassador of the United States of America in the Democratic Republic of South of Sudan had accused them of deceiving a recognized religious leader and obtaining American passports through deception. So, to be on the safe side, he dismissed the idea of stepping foot into the mosque again. With no appreciable improvement, Mark decided to forget about Malik Reza and search for the young woman in the houses of the 5 people bearing the name Ridwan Khan. He thought of Malik Reza as a single man living alone. This time around, his intuition steered him in another direction. His experience with Muslims taught him that most of the Muslim men prefer to lock their young wives at home and hide them as if they were precious pearls. So before dropping Malik Reza from his search list, he made up his mind to find out if Malik Reza had a young wife holed up at home. On the 4th day, he waited for 10 minutes after Malik Reza had departed to cross the street and ring the doorbell. He heard immediately a voice of a woman responding to his call in a thick Indian accent, "My husband has just gone to work." He heard her but could not see her. He wanted to see her face. He continued to ring the doorbell until she showed up at the door. She is the one who came to his house along with that evil African-American man and kidnapped his beloved wife. The young woman also recognized Mark Johnson and immediately retreated and locked herself inside her house. Mark called her to come out but she did not respond. He knew that if he did nothing about it, the woman would immediately inform her husband, who would in turn hide her somewhere else. Throwing caution to the wind, Mark forced his way inside the house and went directly to the room the young woman had come out of. He knocked loudly but she did not respond. Mark fully expected the young woman to phone her husband and call him in. He understood that when her husband returned he would not hesitate for a second to shoot and kill him. A person in Reza's position would do anything to cover up the plot. Mark threatened to call the police if the woman would not reopen the door. The young woman continued ignoring his threats. As Mark had anticipated, she wasted no time in getting her husband on his cell, telling him of the intruder in her home trying to get into her room. Mark managed to knock down the door and gain entrance. The young woman did not scream or try to alert the neighbors in any way. She did not want anyone to know about what was going on in her house. There was a distinct risk that someone would call it in on 911 and that was the last thing she wanted. Mark knew exactly why his quarry had chosen to remain silent. She just pointed her hand to the door indicating that he should leave immediately, and when he refused, she began to push him out. Mark was able to overpower the young woman and began to question her. He told her that she was the one who came over a month before to his house along with another black man, claimed to be FBI agents, and kidnapped his wife. He asked her to tell him what they did with his wife. The young woman decided to play the game of not knowing English and talked to him in Urdu. Mark refused to believe her and reminded her that she had just talked to him in English and said, "My husband has just gone to work." He smugly told her that the day she showed up on his doorstep, she was speaking in English. The young woman tried to stall and tried to prevent Mark from calling the police. Reverting to English, she told him that her husband is a devout Muslim, and hence had strictly instructed her not to open the door to anyone or talk to any strange man in his absence. Mark did not buy reasoning and flipped out his cell, punching out the 911 line. The young woman assaulted him, kicked the phone out of his hand, and prevented him from calling the police. The cell phone went underneath the couch. Mark was forced to fight with her when she became violent. He managed to hold her from her back and control both her hands. Unexpectedly, she slammed her right foot down over his foot, causing Mark to strike her on her head, rendering her unconscious. She collapsed in front of him. Then, he carried her unconscious body and laid it on the couch. After that he began to search for his cell phone. Before Mark Johnson could find his phone, the sound of a car coming up the driveway alerted him to Malik Reza's arrival. Looking out, he spotted Malik jumping out of his vehicle and rushing towards the house. Mark realized his delay in subduing his quarry was now proving to be deadly. Now, an enraged husband might very well shoot him and close the chapter of his wife's involvement in the kidnap and murder of his wife. Malik Reza would simply have to say he killed the intruder in self-defense after he received a call from his wife, now unconscious wife. Mark, knowing that he was not going to be able to escape through the front gates, decided his best recourse lay in making his way downstairs. He ran down and locked the basement door behind him. When he reached the basement, he was shocked to see his own wife tied up on a bed with a duct tape across her mouth. The cellar had a very bad odor. He understood that his wife was imprisoned all this time in this filthy place and fed like an animal. His wife recognized him but could not make a sound. Even before he could free her, he heard the sound of someone trying to force the basement door open. He knew it was Malik Reza. He ran back to the door, kept both his hands on it to prevent Malik's attempt to force it open. The door was locked by a latch from within. Then, Mark heard Malik shouting at him and ordering him to open the door. He threatened to knock the door down and come in and shoot him and kill his wife too. Mark did not respond to his threats and continued to hold the door. Malik began to hammering the door with some sort of large tool. Mark knew the door would not hold. He knew Malik would do anything to break the door and come in and kill them. He also knew he had no phone or any means of communicating with the outside world. Worse than that, he was unarmed. There was little chance of anyone responding to cries from the basement. Before anyone would come to their rescue, Malik Reza managed to knock down the door. Mark caught hold of his right hand where there was a revolver and began his struggle to disarm him. Some of the neighbors called the police reporting shots being fired from the house. They said they spotted a white man standing in front of the house a few minutes before they heard the firing. When the police arrived to a dead silence in the house, as if the house was devoid of inhabitants. More than 10 police officers entered the house fully armed and ready for a possible encounter with the shooter. When they entered the first room, they found Mrs. Reza unconscious on the couch. Some of them proceeded further and began to search the rooms upstairs. Then, they began to file down through the collapsed basement door. The basement was very dimly lit. 2 officers used their torches and the first sight greeting them was a body on its stomach in a pool of blood. The second was a woman tied up on the only available bed on the basement. Her mouth was sealed with big tape but her eyes were wide open and full of fear. The last person they saw was a white man sitting on a corner. As soon as their piercing lights fell on his face he lifted up his hands and surrendered. When the police confronted her with the undeniable evidences of her involvement in the kidnap of Susan Johnson, Mrs. Reza admitted her crime. She confessed that her husband had received $250,000 from a wealthy Indian Muslim man in Mumbai and he was promised to receive $750,000 if he masterminded and carried out successfully the kidnap of the blasphemous Indian slum girl, Aphrodite Krishna Khan, now Susan Johnson. According to her confession, after her husband's return from Mumbai he shared the kidnap plot with the imam of the mosque where he regularly attended and performed his prayers. The imam was originally an Egyptian Muslim immigrant. His name was Imam Fawad Abdul Rauf. He welcomed the idea and issued a fatwa endorsing it. Then, Imam Abdul Rauf introduced Reza to an African American in the mosque and told him to involve him in the kidnap plan. That man was the late Muhammad Jeremiah. Malik Reza was the one who paid $30,000 to Muhammad Jeremiah and involved him in the kidnap of the apostate Indian Muslim woman. The FBI agent, Malik Reza convinced his Indian wife to join in the kidnap of the blasphemous woman. He was the one who coached Muhammad Jeremiah and his wife and forged their FBI identifications. Prior to that, Reza used his position in the FBI to locate Aphrodite Krishna Khan, Christina Lewinsky, who had taken the Bureau's advice of changing her name and relocating. It was then a simple matter for him to find out her new address and name. Then, Mrs. Reza explained why her husband decided to use her and the African American man. She was 25 years old and Muhammad Jeremiah was 54 years old. Reza anticipated that the age difference and the racial background of both would not lead Susan Johnson and her husband to suspect any foul play or a relationship between the two. He knew that Susan, as an Indian woman, would know a young girl like his wife who was also from an Indian background would not fall in love or marry a black man no matter what he might offer her. In addition to that, the age difference between the two would make it even impossible to believe there was a relation between the two. Reza expected that by sending a young woman with the black man, the victim and her family would suspect little, if anything, amiss. Malik Reza's plan worked perfectly well. The duo kidnapped Susan and brought her to Reza's house where she was imprisoned in their basement and tortured daily. Reza could not kill her because he agreed with his Indian accomplices that someone would come from their side and murder her, recording the act on tape. Then and only then, would Reza get the rest of his ransom. Meanwhile, Reza and Shabnam told Susan Johnson that they would not kill her if her husband agreed to pay a ransom and stop the circulation of the provocative movie and the distribution of their offensive book. All this was just to mislead her and gain time until her appointed killer, Rashid Sheikh, would arrive from London, UK. The trouble started when Muhammad Jeremiah wanted more money than was originally agreed upon. Reza paid him another $30,000 to appease him. Even then, Muhammad Jeremiah demanded that Malik Reza use his influence in the Muslim community to find him a young Indian girl to wed. She had to be a teenager and a virgin who never slept with a man before. Reza told him that due to his age, race, and black skin color no Indian girl would agree to marry him even if he was the last man on earth. All was not lost as Muhammad Jeremiah was convinced by some Somalian men at the mosque that he could travel to Somalia and marry, at the same time, 4 Somalian girls as young as 9 and 10, all are sealed virgins. His mind made up, Muhammad decided to leave his native land, emigrate to the pure Muslim land of Somalia, join the Al-Shabaab Jihadi group, and enjoy his Somali child brides. In anticipation of this plan, he decided to take another big bite out of his financier. He explained his plan to Malik Reza and demanded another $50,000. When Reza refused to pay, Muhammad threatened to report him to the police. This time, Reza did not bend to the threat. He knew that Muhammad would do nothing of the sort because he himself was directly implicated. In order to scare Reza into compliance, Muhammad Jeremiah spread the word among his circle of Somali friends. When Reza heard from some Somalis in the mosque, he approached the Egyptian Imam, Fawad Abdul Rauf, and informed him that Muhammad Jeremiah was becoming a loose cannon and a threat to their organization. Immediately, the Imam Abdul Rauf instructed Reza to silence the African American man before it was too late. Following the advice of the Imam, Malik Reza went to Muhammad Jeremiah and murdered him in his apartment. The Egyptian Imam and the Indian FBI agent thought that the murder of the African American man would close that chapter forever. Although the murder of Muhammad Jeremiah led the police to suspect the Malik Reza's involvement, but the burden of proof was a major problem. When Malik Reza was cleared by his Indian accomplice, the police were stonewalled. Surprisingly, the police could not build any link between the kidnap of Susan Johnson and the murder of Muhammad Jeremiah. All the links were there and as clear as the sun. They just needed little effort from a keen investigator. Muhammad Jeremiah was the old black man, Rick Adams, who came with the Indian or Pakistani young woman, Shamim Siddiqui, claimed to be FBI agents, and kidnapped Mrs. Johnson. The kidnap pointed to an inside job. It was obvious, those kidnappers had link with the FBI and that link was Malik Reza. But, the problem is the sickening policy of political correctness, which prevents taking any precautionary action against the followers of the religion of peace. On the day Mark Johnson, through his private efforts and investigation, reached the house where his beloved was imprisoned, was supposed to be the last day for Susan Johnson. On that day, the appointed killer, Rashid Sheikh, arrived from London and stayed in a hotel near the airport. He then phoned Malik Reza, informed him about his arrival, and gave him the address of the hotel where he was staying. Reza left his house and headed to the hotel to fetch the killer and bring him to his house to finish the job and finalize the deal. While Reza was halfway, he received that frantic call from his wife. When he learned that the husband of Susan Johnson discovered the hiding place of his imprisoned wife, Malik knew the only way to stop him from exposing the plot was to silence him. To kill him first and then bring the appointed killer of his wife and murder her too. That day, Reza and his accomplices planned something, but God planned something different. Instead of killing Mark Johnson, Malik Reza was killed by his own gun. When the police arrived, his wife, Shabnam, was revived, arrested, and taken into custody. She was confronted with all undeniable evidences. She revealed the entire plot from A to Z. The appointed killer, Rashid Sheikh, was arrested on the same day in his hotel room. On the following day, the wicked Imam, Fawad Abdul Rauf, was dragged with handcuffs on his hands from his mosque and thrown behind bars where he belongs. The British anti-terrorist police officer, Muhammad Khan, was arrested along with his father, Professor Sajid Khan. The last detainees were the 3 wealthy Indians who initiated the plot and financed it. Their names and social positions made the case sensational all over India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and considered great stigma for Muslims of the subcontinent of India. Before their evil plot was unearthed, they were considered the most pious and popular wealthy business tycoons. They built thousands of mosques, helped millions of Muslims, and involved in many other charitable works. They were known as Habibullah Sheikh, Abdul al-Rab Khan, and Muhammad Israel. Islam teaches that the angel of death is called Israel. He kills people on behalf of Allah. His main duty is to catch your soul, separates it from your body, and turns you into a dead corpse. On that day, Christina was snatched from the angel of death, Muhammad Israel, and his gang by her loving husband, Michael. After her miraculous rescue, she was taken directly to the hospital and kept under observation after treatment. She spent a couple of weeks in the hospital before she was discharged and allowed to join her loving family. She exposed the evil man, Malik Reza, who tortured her day and night for a month. The wicked man raped her many times. He even raped her in front of his wife. Then, the FBI interrogated Mark Johnson and tried to find out how he had discovered the hiding place of his kidnapped wife. He flatly refused. The FBI tried to nail him on charges of obstruction, but his lawyers put paid to that attempt. Furthermore, the FBI strove hard to implicate him with the charge of murdering or causing the murder of the FBI agent, Malik Reza, but they could not succeed in establishing that charge too. The gun that found near the killed FBI agent was his own rifle and had his fingerprints and no one else. Nevertheless, the FBI considered the cause of his death was a murder and not a suicide, and did not rule out the possibility of having been killed by someone else. Therefore, the case remains open.